Thanks so much for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Lori Johnson. A massive winter storm is slamming the Midwest and then heading east. 23 states are being affected, many of them the same places that were preparing for a blizzard only a week ago. Caitlin Burke reports.
Another week, another massive snowstorm. Forecasters say this storm is the most far-reaching of the season, running from Nebraska to Maine and impacting more than 100 million people. Officials are warning to avoid travel if possible. Roads are a nightmare between ice and poor visibility, and traveling by air just really isn't an option. 2,000 flights already canceled.
If you have the option to stay home or avoid travel, we ask you do it.
In Chicago Sunday, conditions were so tough that even plows had trouble getting through. The city hit hard by both snow and strong wind, creating at times zero visibility.
So we are getting in this 24-hour cycle what we got for all the month of January.
Today, the Northeast being hit by the brunt of the storm, ice being the biggest concern. Groundhog's Day celebrations in many cities being postponed today because of the snowstorm. Bad news for those of us anxiously awaiting spring. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Today, President Obama is submitting the first ever $4 trillion budget to Congress, but don't expect it to pass. Washington insiders say it is dead on arrival. It calls for more spending on roads, bridges, and public transit to the tune of $478 billion. Half of that money would come from a tax on profits that U.S. companies make overseas, a whopping 14% tax. U.S. companies already pay 35% tax for work here in the U.S., one of the highest corporate taxes in the world.
Federal social programs are supposed to help the poor and disadvantaged, and advocates for the government say the government aid say it does just that.
But as Paul Strand explains, it turns out many of these programs spend billions of your dollars while doing no good at all.
A new book is raising the question few in Washington dare to ask: do federal social programs work? And its author has a definitive answer.
The government is stepping in saying, we got a program for you that's going to change your life and make your life better off. And the fact is, these programs aren't making people better off.
The Heritage Foundation's David Mulhausen combed exhaustively through tons of the very best gold standard studies.
And they almost all find the federal government fails at improving the lives of Americans.
A program like Head Start has the good intention of helping disadvantaged children catch up with better off kids. But Mulhausen says the best studies find that it's not reaching its goals.
Head Start has no impact on improving the cognitive abilities of these students. And we're spending $8 billion a year on this program that's not making a difference.
All these federal social programs meant to do good, but doing little or nothing, cost taxpayers more than $440 billion a year. So what's to lose by killing them off?
Programs that don't improve people's lives are not going to be missed.
Mulhausen argues that some programs actually do harm, like the 21st Century Learning Centers that are supposed to help kids after school become better students. But he says the studies again show the results aren't there.
What they found is that kids who participate in this program are more likely to be suspended. They did less well in school. This program is about $1 billion a year. It's a small chunk and change in the federal budget, but it's that $1 billion that causes harm.
Some suspect since the author works at the Conservative Heritage Foundation, he's just out to attack liberal programs. But others have come to similar conclusions. And Mulhausen's book also blasts the results of favorite conservative programs, like those meant to curb teen sex or bolster the family. He simply advocates stripping the money from any program that doesn't work. And he does point out there are private and local programs that are successful.
It's not that nothing works. It's just big federal government programs don't work.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Japan has heightened security at airports and at Japanese facilities overseas after ISIS beheaded its second Japanese hostage this weekend. Journalist Kenji Goto was also a Christian, and today the flag at the Japanese Prime Minister's official residence is being flown at half-staff in a display of mourning for Goto and the other Japanese hostage who was killed by the militant Islamic group. The Prime Minister is also defending his policy now towards terrorism. He faced criticism for announcing plans to give $200 million in non-military aid to fight against the Islamic State group. That pledge came just days after the militants demanded a $200 million ransom for the 2 hostages.
Libraries in Iraq are in danger. Islamic State militants have removed and destroyed everything except Islamic texts from the Central Library in Mosul. The militants have also destroyed archaeological relics, and now even more books are in the firing line. Days after the Central Library ransacking, militants broke into the University of Mosul's library and made a bonfire out of hundreds of books on science and culture.
Hundreds of armed Muslim men attacked a Christian school with boys in northern Pakistan. At least 4 boys were injured and the school was badly damaged. The violent incident took place in the Pakistani province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. The attack was a retaliation over the drawings of Muhammad in the French magazine Charlie Hebdo. The Fides news agency reports angry Muslims jumped over the protective wall around the panel of the high school. Christians are regularly persecuted in Pakistan. As usual, they were targeted even though they did not support the satirical cartoons of Muhammad.
The death toll in embattled eastern Ukraine is on the rise. Officials say 5 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed and 29 wounded over the past few days. Fighting has intensified after peace talks between the Ukrainian government and Russian-backed rebels collapsed. Ukraine's prime minister says more than 1,000 residents have been evacuated from the town of Debaltsev, a strategic railway hub being held by the government, but largely surrounded by rebel forces, leaving only one road open for escape.
Leaders of the Southern Baptist Church say they are working toward racial reconciliation within their denomination. Only about 20% of Southern Baptist congregations are non-white and less than 1% are multi-ethnic. I spoke with Reverend Russell Moore, who leads the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, on why the church is making a push toward integrating their congregations.
Well, one of the things that we've noticed is that many times when we talk about racial reconciliation, what Christians tend to think is that this means that black churches and white churches ought not to hate each other. And we agree, of course, that's base level minimum. But it seems to me that the church ought to do more than that. The church ought to model for the rest of the world what it means to be reconciled to God and to be reconciled with one another, so that our churches become sort of a movie trailer for the kingdom of God to come. And that's a kingdom made up from every tribe, tongue, nation, and language.
We do know that the Southern Baptist Convention did elect its first African-American president a few years ago. But curious, how difficult do you think this will be in light of the Southern Baptist history on race relations?
Well, I don't think that that is going to be the problem, because actually I think that our history of sinning against God and against one another is something that is at the forefront of our mind. And I think what God tends to do is to use broken, sinful, repentant people in order to be ambassadors of reconciliation. That's certainly what happened with the Apostle Paul, and that's what's happened throughout the history of the church. So I think that if we as a people own our wicked history and our wicked past, but also recognize that God is giving us a second chance to be agents of reconciliation, I think that God can do quite a bit with that.
Now, to see more of this interview, simply log on to cbnnews.com.
Former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee says Christians shouldn't be punished for believing that being gay is a choice. On CNN's State of the Union, he argued that forcing people of faith to accept gay marriage is like forcing Jews to serve bacon-wrapped shrimp in their deli. Both foods are violations of Jewish kosher rules. He said, we're so sensitive to make sure we don't offend certain religions, but then we act like Christians can't have the convictions that they've had for over 2,000 years. The comments came as the former Baptist pastor is weighing a run for the 2016 presidential nomination. Huckabee also added a pitch for inclusion in his remarks, saying he has some gay friends.
The owners of a gift shop and bistro who refused to hold a gay wedding have decided to stop doing weddings altogether. Betty and Richard Odegaard say they've settled a complaint by 2 gay men who wanted to get married at their shop in Grimes, Iowa. The gay couple filed a complaint with the State Civil Rights Commission, saying the shop could not discriminate based on religion since the former church is a public venue. The Odegaards say their shop has always served gays and lesbians, but providing a space for a wedding would have violated their religious beliefs as Mennonites.
Coming up, the doctor who barely survived Ebola is going back to the scene of the outbreak. Hear why he's uniquely qualified to help others beat the deadly virus. Well, it's killed more than 8,000 people, including nearly 500 healthcare workers. And even though the deadly outbreak of Ebola in West Africa is improving, those countries remain in desperate need of medical help. That's why Ebola's survivor, Dr. Rick Sacra, has gone back. Heather Sells spoke with him before he left for Liberia.
Just 4 months ago, Dr. Rick Sacra fought for his life in a Nebraska hospital. The veteran missionary contracted the deadly Ebola virus while volunteering in Liberia at the height of the outbreak. He and his wife Debbie remember what it felt like as the disease took over.
I was just focusing on the Lord. I tell you, I hung on to the Lord's Prayer like a drowning man. I prayed that prayer many times every day and just wept through it most of the time.
Debbie remembers sharing scripture via Skype and how they both clung to the Lord.
You just learn to trust God more deeply. You just learn to trust that He's in control and that and that He's really good.
The Sacras are no strangers to West Africa. They raised their children and served in Liberia as missionaries for 15 years. Recently, family circumstances brought them home to Holden, Massachusetts. Dr. Sacra continued to serve, traveling back and forth several times a year. Now, just a few months after recovering from Ebola, he's packing up and heading back.
Dr. Sacra is perhaps specially equipped to return to Liberia. As an Ebola survivor, he is now considered immune to the deadly virus that he once battled.
They've seen situations in which somebody who had Ebola and survived was then exposed again. And, you know, they've never had a case where somebody got sick again. So I think the idea of immunity is pretty well established.
Sacra's pastor, Tom Curtis, says watching the doctor battle Ebola this last year helped to grow the congregation's faith and united area churches through prayer. Members at Holden Chapel are excited that he's going back.
It wouldn't make sense almost to us if he didn't, you know, because he's not that kind of person. I mean, he's very brave, he's very humble, he's very giving.
Sacra will work for a month at a hospital in Monroe, the Liberian capital. He plans on other trips this year as well. The timing is strategic as West Africa desperately needs healthcare workers. For years, the region witnessed an exodus of medical professionals, eager for better pay and working conditions abroad. That, coupled with the deaths of almost 500 workers during the Ebola outbreak, has crippled an already fragile system. Sacra's vision is to return to Liberia full-time, training a new generation of doctors, equipped to practice and to share their faith. The Sacra stand amazed at the platform they received this year to share theirs.
You know, God has a way of doing that, of taking something bad and turning it into something good.
Their hope now, 0 Ebola cases in Africa. A strong medical team meeting both physical and spiritual needs. And to help rebuild a region struggling to find its way after the loss of thousands. Heather Sells, CBN News.
The Israeli government has honored the late Myles Monroe for his ongoing contribution to the Jewish state.
Tourism Minister Uzi Landau presented the award to Monroe's children in Jerusalem. It was given on behalf of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus and World Jewish Congress during their 9th annual event to honor Christian allies. Caucus Director Joss Reinstein called Monroe courageous and said he had the heart of a lion.
Myles Monroe was a true Israeli hero. He stood up unabashedly in a lot of countries where it's not popular to talk on behalf of Israel and say that he loves Israel, he loves the people of Israel, he loves the God of Israel, he loves the Bible of Israel. And because of that, he's just left such an impact on the government of Israel, on the state of Israel and its people.
It's definitely an honor and a privilege. I'm more proud of my parents every day. Every day they show me how much they really loved the world and how much God means to them, and they really demonstrated that in everything they did around the world. So it's definitely an honor.
Monroe and his wife Ruth were killed in a plane crash back in November. The couple's children say they are carrying on their parents' work. Up next, Taking the Hill, hear about the record number of women now in Congress and the challenges they face while serving there. That story's coming up after this. Republicans won a historic victory in last November's congressional elections. The new Congress has set another record as well.
That's right. There are more women serving in office than ever before. Jennifer Wishon brings us that story from Capitol Hill.
It wasn't that long ago that about the only way a woman could get into Congress was if her husband died in office and she was appointed to finish his term. Jeanette Rankin of Montana became the first woman elected to Congress in 1917, 3 years before women won the right to vote. It would be another 15 years before voters put a woman in the Senate. Hattie Caraway from Arkansas won that distinction, becoming the first woman elected to a full term. Fast forward to 2015, as a record 104 women will play a role on Capitol Hill in crafting the nation's laws. Among them, Elise Stefanik, the youngest woman ever elected to the House, and Mia Love, the first Black Republican Congresswoman.
I've never really looked at issues in Washington, D.C. as women's issues. I think women have a different perspective on every issue.
South Dakota Congresswoman Kristi Noem co-chairs the bipartisan Congressional Women's Caucus. This diverse group finds areas of agreement, such as ending human trafficking, and tackles them like moms checking off a to-do list.
There's so many times I've been in a discussion on a bill or policy where if the women weren't in the room, it wouldn't have been an adequate solution. It wouldn't have been something that would have worked for our country.
My experience has been that women like to solve the problem and aren't as concerned necessarily about who gets the credit. And that's a different way to govern than our male counterparts.
Congresswoman Hahn and Noem also belong to a women's-only Bible study, where their faith helps diffuse political differences.
It's the one area we're able to share with each other some of our struggles that we probably would not share with a bigger group or with our male counterparts.
They appreciate and need each other's support.
The other women that are here are absolutely fantastic, and they get it, and we have great relationships.
Despite making up half the population, women are a clear minority on the Hill.
It's really interesting being a conservative woman in Congress, and many times you do feel like you're kind of at the end of the list, if you will. And even when you're the next in line, there's always a guy that is going to be pushed forward in front of you.
What an honor it is for me to be with you after the President's State of the Union.
2 years in a row, Republican women have responded to the President's State of the Union address. But in the Republican-controlled House, men head up all the committees. In the Republican-controlled Senate, just one woman, Alaska Senator Lisa Murkowski, holds the title of chairman. It shows that women still face the challenge of breaking into the men's club.
For a lot of us women, the chances to build relationships with individuals gets a little hard on Capitol Hill. You know, our chance to socialize with our colleagues, for me, certainly isn't going to happen in a bar at night. I'm not going to do that. So my chance to really build relationships with other colleagues is going to be in a Bible study or potentially in the gym. That can end up hurting your chance to become a chairman or to rise to the top of some kind of panel or task force.
Polling shows a majority of Americans, 63%, believe the country would be better off if more women were in positions of political leadership. It's an opinion shared by both women and men across every age group. So why then do women only make up about 20% of the House and Senate?
I think a lot of women just don't feel, like they want to put their family through the trials and tribulations of running for office, and the way politics has become so combative and so negative that I think a lot of women just think, who needs that?
It can be a tremendous sacrifice, especially for moms who leave their families and sometimes travel across the country.
I had to be asked to run for office or else I never would be here. I wanted to be a farmer the rest of my life, but people kept asking me for several years, and finally I thought, you know, I can't just say I want this country to be different. Maybe I have to contribute to that process.
For now, Democrats corner the women in Congress market. 14 of the 20 women senators are Democrats, along with 62 of the 84 women in the House.
Are liberal-minded women more apt to run for office, or are Democrats just better at recruiting female candidates?
I think both is true. I think a lot of it has to do with the way the media approaches a liberal candidate versus a conservative candidate. I think women that are on the left don't have the microscope put on them that women on the right do.
Congresswoman Hahn says Democrats also have more role models. In the House, they're led by Nancy Pelosi, who also served as the first female speaker. Women on both sides of the aisle hope Congress will someday more closely mirror the population. But for now, they're celebrating their record numbers and weighing in on the nation's laws in ways only women can.
And I think the role models that are in this Congress are important for young girls and women across this country to see that this really is something, it's a noble profession and it's something worth striving for.
Jennifer Wishon, CBN News, Capitol Hill.
So 20% female in Congress, but yet the female population in America is about 55%. We need to get that number up, gals, but it is a sacrifice.
It is. It's a lot of work. But having been raised by a single mom, I am all for more women in leadership.
There you go.
Sure. Stay with us. We're coming right back. Operation Blessing is changing lives in Guatemala.
They're training families to grow their own healthy food. Isabella and her husband have 4 children of their own. They're also raising Isabella's 9 younger siblings since their mother died. Although they worked really hard, there was never enough to feed everyone. Operation Blessing started a farming project in Isabella's community to teach her and other women how to grow nutritious vegetables they could use to feed their families and also sell at the market for additional income. Isn't that great?
Beautiful.
Operation Blessing.
You got it.
Well, that's it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the stories you care most about at cbnnews.com.
We'd like to hear what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Make it a marvelous Monday, everybody.